Hey everybody, welcome back. So I'm going to be doing another chapter of McCaffrey's Dragonsong. Last chapter I should have given a warning at the start of the chapter, and I really do apologize that there was a brief portion of violence. I know that was considered punishment at one time. In this day and age, it really is unacceptable. And thankfully, for the most part, it's not done anymore. However, she did get to see something that nobody else got to see. The mating dance of a fire lizard queen with her bronzes. So it looks like I'm going to have a Miss Skitter for this recording again. If she disappears momentarily, I paused the video so that I could take a drink. We are going to have our nice quiet evening once I put my reading glasses on over these suckers so I can actually see even the screen. Oh, and if everything goes correctly tomorrow morning and I actually wake up on time, this mop of a hair is going to be gone. So this is going to be the last you see of this long thing. I cannot wait to get it back to the length that I love. This is just a little too much for me. So we're going to be starting chapter 3. So at the end of chapter 4, at the end of chapter 2, she was really smarting from the punishment that her father doled out. However, she was really happy about the fire lizards, I should say. They're not dragons. You know, I really should find the first, well, not the first book of this series, because it doesn't touch on it there. But I really should find my copy of where they first land on Pern, because that gives you a whole lot more about fire lizards and dragons and how they came to be. Oof, I'm going to have to adjust the light a little bit. I'm sorry, I can't see fully. Let's try and pull the ring light a little closer. We'll work with it. Oh, and the old fart's still here. Yes, she is. She's saying hello. It's my little old lady. Oh, let me know if you would like to hear any of the Xanth series from Piers Anthony. I love that series. The puns are so bad. I may just read it just for the heck of it. But I got a million books to go through. When Melanie... I forgot. Chapter 3. Hold her watch, hold her learn. Something new in every turn. Oldest may be coldest too. Serve the right, find the true. When Menely finally got back to the Seahold, the sky was darkening. The hall was bustling with the usual end-of-day activity. The oldsters were settling the dinner. The oldsters were setting the dinner tables, tidying the great hall, and chattering away as if they hadn't met for turns, instead of only that morning. With luck, thought Melanie, she could get her sack down to the water rooms. Where did you go for those greens, Melanie? Narat? Her mother appeared in front of her. Almost. Immediately, Melanie saw that her pert words were ill-timed. Mavi roughly grabbed the sack and peered inside critically. If you'd not made the trip worth the while, sail's been sighted. Sail? Mavi closed the sack and shoved it into Melanie's hands. Yes, sail. You should have been back hours ago. Whatever possessed you to take off so far with thread? There weren't any greens near. With thread due to fall any time, you're a fool twice over. I was safe enough. I saw a dragon rider doing his sweep. That pleased Mavi. Thank heavens we're beholden to Brendan. They're a proper wear. Mavi gave her daughter a shove towards the kitchen level. Take those and be sure the girls wash every speck of sand off. Who knows who's sailing in? Melanie slipped through the busy kitchen, countering orders flaring at her by various other women who saw her in the capable assistance saw in her a capable assistance in their own tasks. Melanie merely brandished the sack and proceeded down to the water rooms. There were some of the older but still able women busily sand scouring the best metal plates and trays. I must have one basin for the greens, Auntie, said Melanie, pushing up to the rack of stone sinks. Greens is easier on old skin than sand, said one of the women in a quivering, long-suffering voice, and promptly deposited her plates in the sink behind her and pulled her plug. More sand and greens than cleaning, another woman remarked in an acid tone. Yes, but take it off, greens, said the obliging one. Oh, what a lovely mess of yellow vines, too. Where did you find them this time of year, daughter? Halfway to Norette, Melanie suppressed her grin at the startled shrieks of dismay. The furthest they'd stir from the hold was the ledge in front on a sunny day. With thread falling? You naughty girl! Did you hear about the sale? Who do you suppose? The new harper. Who else? There was a wild chorus of crackling laughs and great wonderings about the appearance of the new harper. They always send a young one here. Petterin was old. He got that way. Same as we did. How would you remember? Why not? I've lived through more harpers than you have, my girl. You have not. I came here from Red Sands in Easta. You were born at Half Circle, you old fool, and I birthed you. Ha! Melanie listened to the four old women arguing back and forth until she heard her mother demanding to know if the greens had been washed and where were the good plates and how was she to get anything done with all the gossip. Melanie found a sieve large enough to hold the washed greens and brought them up for her mother's inspection. Well, that'll be enough for the head table, Mavi said, poking at the glistening mounds with her fork. When she stared at her daughter, You can't appear like that. Here, you, Bertie, take the greens and put the dressings on them. The one in the brown flask on the fourth shelf in the cool room. You, Melanie, have the goodness to get yourself sand-free and decently dressed. You're to attend old uncle. The moment he opens his mouth, Shove something into it, or we'll be hearing him all night long." Melanie groaned. Old Uncle smelled almost as much as he chatted. "Stella's much better at handling him, Mavi. Stella's to attend the head table. You do as you're told and be grateful." Mavi fixed her rebellious daughter with a stern eye, tactfully reminding her of her disgrace. Then Mavi was called away to check a sauce for the baking fish. Melanie went off to the bathing rooms, trying to convince herself that she was lucky she hadn't been banished completely from the hall this evening, though tending old Uncle came as close as it could be to banishment. Honor obligated the Seaholder to have all of his household there to greet the new Harper. Melanie shucked off the dirty tunic and breeches and slipped into a warm bathing pool. She swung her shoulders this way and that for the water to wash the sand and sweat as painlessly as possible from her sore back. Her hair was all gritty with sea sand too, so she washed that. She was quick because she'd have her hands full with old Uncle. It'd be much better to have him all arranged in his hearth seat before everyone else assembled for dinner. Draping her dirty clothes around her, Melanie took the calculated risk that few people would be in the high hold at this hour and charged up the dimly lit steps from the bathing pools to the sleeping level. Every glow in the main corridor was uncovered, which meant that the Harper, if such it were, would have a guided tour of the hold later. She dashed down to the narrow steps leading to the girls' dormitories and got into her cubicle without a sound the wiser. When she got to old Uncle's room later, she had to clean his face and hands and slip a clean tunic over his bony shoulders. All the while he was chattering about new blood in the hold, and who was the new Harper going to marry? He'd have a thing or two to tell the Harper, give him the chance. And why did she have to be so rough? His bones ached. Must be a change in the weather, because his old legs never failed to give warning. Hadn't he warned them about the big storm a while back? 2 boats had been lost with all crew. If they'd paid attention to his warning, it wouldn't have happened. His own son was the worst one for not listening to what his father said. And why was she hurrying him so? He liked to take his time. No, couldn't he have had the blue tunic, the one his daughter made him, matching his eyes, she said. And why hadn't Turlong come to see him today, as he'd asked and asked and asked? But who paid him any heed anyway? The old man was so frail that he was no burden to a strong girl like Melanie. She carried him down the steps, him complaining all the way about people who'd been dead before she was born. Old Uncle's notion of time was distorted, and that's what Pedron had told her. Brightest in the old Uncle's memories were his earlier days, when he'd been Seaholder of Half Circle, before a tangled trawler line had sliced off his legs below the knee. The great hall was almost ready for guests when Melanie entered with him. "They're tacking into dock," someone was saying as Melanie arranged old Uncle in his special seat by the fire. She wrapped him well in the softest ware hides and tied the stump that would keep him upright. When he got excited, old Uncle had a tendency to forget he had no feet. Who's tacking into dock? Who's coming? What's all this hubble-bubble about? Melanie told him, and he subsided. Moments later, wanting to know in a querulous tone of voice if anyone was going to feed him, or was he supposed to sit here dinnerless? Scylla, in her gown she'd spent all winter making, swirled past Melanie, pressing a small pocket into her hand. Feed him these if he gets difficult. And she skimmed away before Melanie could say a word. Opening the packet, Melanie saw balls of sweets made from seaweed flavored with purple green seed. One could chew these for hours, keeping the mouth fresh and moist. Hiccup. Small wonder why Stella had been able to keep old Uncle happy. Melanie giggled and then wondered why Stella was being helpful. It must have pleased Stella to learn Melanie had been displaced as Harper. Or would she know? Mavi wouldn't have mentioned it. But the Harper was here now anyhow. Now that she had old Uncle settled, Melanie's curiosity got the better of her, and she slipped over to the window. There was no sign of the sail in the harbor now, but she could see the cluster of men, glows held high, as they walked around the shore from the dock to the harbor proper. To the hold proper. Keen though her eyes were, Melanie could not pick out the new faces. And that was that. Old Uncle began one of his monologues in a high-pitched voice, so Melanie scooted back to his side before her mother could notice she'd left her spot. There was so much bustle, putting food on the tables, pouring the welcoming cups of wine, all the hold arranging itself to meet the guests. No one noticed what Melanie was or wasn't doing. Just then, old Uncle came to himself again, eyes bright and focused on her face. What's the stir today, girl? Good haul? Someone getting spliced? What's the lay? There's a new Harper coming, everyone thinks. There's a new Harper coming, everyone thinks, old Uncle. Not another one. Old Uncle was disgusted. Harpers aren't what they used to be when I was seaholder. Not by a long crack. I minded myself of one Harper we had. His voice fell clearly into the sudden quiet hall. Melanie! Her mother's voice was low, but the urgency was unmistakable. Melanie fumbled in her pocket, found 2 sweet balls, and popped them into old Uncle's mouth. Whatever he'd been about to say was stopped by the necessity of dealing with the 2 large round objects. He mumbled contentedly to himself as he chewed and chewed and chewed. All the food had been served and everyone seated before Melanie got so much as a glimpse of the new arrivals. There had been a new Harper. She heard his name before she ever saw his face. Elgion. Harper Elgion. She heard that he was young and good-looking and had brought 2 guitars, 2 wooden pipes, and 3 drums, each carried separately in its own case of stiffened warehide. She heard that he'd been very seasick across the Creole Bay and wasn't doing justice to the lavish dinner spread in his honor. With him had come a craftmaster from the Smith craft hold to do some metalwork required on the new ship, and the other repairs beyond the metalmen in the sea hold. She heard that there was an urgent need at Ingenhold for any salted or smoked fish the sea hold might have to spare on the return voyage. From where Melanie sat with old Uncle, she could see the backs of the heads at the high table and occasionally a profile of one of the visitors. Very frustrating. So was old Uncle and the other elderly relatives whose old bones rated them a spot near the fire. The aunts were, as usual, squabbling over who had received the choicier portions of fish, and then old Uncle decided to call them to order. Only his mouth was full at that moment, and he choked. So the aunts turned on Melanie for trying to stuff him to an early death. Melanie could hear nothing over their babble. She tried to content herself with the prospect of hearing the harpers sing, as he surely would once the immeasurable meal was ended. But it was hot so close to the big fire, and the heat made old Uncle smell worse than ever. And she was very tired after the day's excursions. She was roused from a half-daze by a sudden hide-wall thundering of heavy sea boots. She jerked fully awake to see the tall figure of the new harper rising at the head table. He had his guitar ready and was taking an easy stance, one foot on the stone bench. "You're sure this hall isn't rocking?" he asked, strumming the few chords to test the instrument's pitch. He was assured that the hall had been steady for many, many turns, never known to rock at all. The harper affected not to be reassured as he tuned the G string slightly higher, to Melanie's relief. He made the guitar moan then like a seasick soul. The laughter rippled through the eager audience. Melanie strained to see how her father was taking this approach. The seaholder had little humor. A harper's welcome was a serious occasion, and Algernon did not appear to realize this. Petteron had often told Melanie how carefully harpers were chosen for the holds they were assigned to. Hadn't anyone warned Algernon about her father's temperament? Suddenly, old Uncle cut across the gentle strumming with a cackle of laughter. "Ha! A man with a humor! That's what we need in this hold. Some laughter, some music. Been missing it. Let's have some rollicking tunes, some funny songs. Give us a good rib-popping ditty, Harper. You know the ones I like." Melanie was aghast. She fumbled in her skirt pocket for some of the sweet balls as she shushed old Uncle. This was exactly the sort of incident that she was supposed to prevent. Harper Algernon had turned at the imperious order, bowing with good respect to the old gentleman by the hearth. "I would if I could, old Uncle," he said most courteously. "But these are serious times." His fingers plucked to deep, somber notes. "Very serious times, and we must put lightness and laughter behind us. Square our backs to the problems that face us. And with that, he swung into a new exhortation to obey the were and honor the dragon rider. The sticky sweet balls had gotten warmed and stuck to the fabric of her pocket, but Melanie finally got some out and into old Uncle's mouth. He chewed angrily, fully aware that his mouth was being plugged, and resented it. He chewed as fast as he could, swallowing to clear his mouth from more complaints. Melanie was only just aware that the new tone was forceful, the words stirring. Harper Elgion had a rich tenor voice, strong and sure. Then old Uncle began to hiccup. Noisily, of course. And to complain, or try to, through the hiccups. Melanie hissed at him to hold his breath, but he was furious at not being allowed to talk, and at getting hiccups, and he started to pound the arm of his chair. The thumps made an out-of-tempo counterpart to the Harper's song, and brought her furious glances from the head table. One of the aunts gave her some water for the old man, which he overturned on Melanie. The next thing, Stella was beside her, gesturing that they were to take the old man back to his quarters instantly. He was still hiccuping as they put him back to bed, and still beating the air with punctuated gestures and half-uttered complaints. You'll have to stay with him until he calms down, Melanie, or he'll fall out of bed. Why ever didn't you give him the sweet balls? They always shut him up, Stella said. I did. They're what started him hiccuping. You can't do anything right, can you? Please, Stella, you stay with him. You manage him so well. I've had him all evening and not heard a word. You were told to keep him quiet. You didn't. You stay. And Stella swept out of the room, leaving Melanie to cope. That was the end of the first of Melanie's difficult days. It took hours for the old man to calm down and go to sleep. Then, as Melanie wearily got to her cubicle, her mother arrived to berate her soundly for the interruption that had given Uncle a chance to embarrass the entire hold. Melanie was given no chance to explain. The next day, thread fell, sequestering them all within the hold for hours. When the fall was over, she had to go with the flamethrower crews. The leading edge of thread had tipped the marshes, which meant hours of plodding through mucky marsh mud and slimy sand. She was tired enough when she returned from that task, but then they all had to help with the big nets and ready the boats for a night trawl. The tide was right then. She was roused before sunrise the next morning to gut and salt the phenomenal catch. That took all the livelong day and sent her to bed weary as she just stripped off her dirty clothes and dropped into her sleeping furs. The next day was devoted to net mending, normally a pleasant task, because the Hold women would chat and sing, but her father was anxious for the nets to be repaired quickly so that he could take the evening tide again for another deep-sea cast. Everyone bent to his work without time for talk or singing while the sea holder prowled among them. He seemed to watch Melanie more often than anyone else, and she felt clumsy. It was then that she began to wonder if perhaps the new harper had found fault with the way the youngsters had been taught their ballads and sagas. Time and again, Patron had told her that there was only one way to teach them, and as she had learned properly from him, she must have passed on the knowledge correctly. Why then did her father seem to be so annoyed with her? Why did he glare at her so much? Was he still angry with her for letting old Uncle babble? She worried enough to ask her sister about it that evening when the ships finally set sail and everyone else could relax a little. Angry about old Uncle? Sella shrugged. What on earth are you talking about, girl? Who remembers that? You think entirely too much about yourself, Melanie. That's your biggest problem. Why would Yarnus care one way or another about you? The scorn in Sella's voice reminded Melanie too accurately that she was only a girl, too big for a proper girl, and the youngest of a large family, therefore of least account. It was in no way for consolation to be insignificant, even if her father was, for that reason, less likely to notice her, or remember her misdeeds, except that he'd remembered about her singing her own songs to the youngsters. Or had Sella forgotten that? Or did Sella even know that? Probably, thought Melanie, as she tried to find a comfortable spot in the old bed rushes for her weary body. But then, what Sella said about Melanie thinking only of herself applied even more to Sella, who was always thinking about her appearance and herself. Sella was old enough to be married to some advantage to the Holt. Her father had only 3 fosterlings at the moment, but 4 of Melanie's 6 brothers were out at other Seaholts, learning their trade. Now, with a harper to speak for them all again, perhaps there'd be some rearrangements. The next day the Hold women spent in washing clothes, with Threadfall past and a good, clear, sunny day that could count on fast drying. Melanie hoped for a chance to speak to her mother to find out if the harper had faulted her teachings, but the opportunity never arose. Instead, Melanie came in for another scolding from Mavi for the state of her clothes, unmended, her bed furs unaired, her hair, her sloppy appearance, and her slothfulness in general. That evening Melanie was quite content to take a bowl of soup and disappear into a shadowy corner of the big kitchen rather than be noticed again. She kept wondering why she was being singled out for so much misunderstanding. Her thoughts kept returning to the sin of having strummed a few bars of her own song, that and being a girl, and the only one who could teach her play in the absence of a real harper. Yes, she finally decided that the reason for her universal disfavor, no one wanted the harper to know that the youngsters had been schooled by a girl. But if she hadn't taught them right, then Pedron had taught her all wrong. That didn't hold water. And if the old man had really written the master harper about her, wouldn't the new harper have been curious or sought her out? Maybe her songs hadn't been as good as Pedron had thought. Probably Pedron had never sent them to the Master Harper, and that message hadn't said anything about her. At any rate, the packet was gone now from the mantel in the records room, and the way things were going, Melanie would never get close enough to Algion to introduce herself. Sure as the sun came up, Melanie could guess that what she'd have to do the next day. Gather new grasses and rushes to repack all the beds in the hold. It was just the sort of thing her mother would think of for someone so out of favor. She was wrong. The ships came back to port just after dawn, their holds packed with yellow stripe and packtails. The entire hold was turned out to gut, salt, and start the smoke cave. Of all the fish in the sea, Melanie detested packtails the most. An ugly fish with a sharp spines all over, it oozed an oily slime that ate into the flesh of your hands and made the skin peel off. Packtails were more head and mouth than anything else, but hack the front end off, and the rounded, blunt tail could be sliced off the backbone. Grilled fresh, it was succulent eating. Smoked, it could be softened later for baking or boiling, and could be as tasty as the day it was caught. But packtails were the messiest, hardest, toughest, smelliest fish to gut. Halfway through the morning, Melanie's knife slipped across the fish she was slicing, gashing her left palm wide open. The pain and shock were so great that Melanie just stood, stupidly staring at her hand bones until Sella realized that she wasn't keeping pace with the others. Melanie, just screaming, "Oh, for the love of Mavi! Mavi!" Sella could be irritating, but she could keep her wits, as she did now, grabbing Melanie's wrists, stopping the spurt of blood from the severed artery. As Mavi came and led her past the furious working holders, Melanie was seized with a sense of guilt. Everyone glared at her as if she deliberately wounded herself to get out of working. The humiliation and silent accusations brought tears to her eyes. Not the pain, nor the sick feeling in her hand. "I didn't do it on purpose," Melanie blurted out to her mother as they reached the hold's infirmary. Her mother stared at her. "Who said that you did?" "No one. They just looked it." "My girl, you think entirely too much about yourself. I assure you that no one was thinking any such thing. Now hold your hand so for a moment." The blood spurted up as Mavi released the pressure in Melanie's wrist. For one instant, Melanie thought she might faint, but she was determined not to think of herself again. She pretended that she didn't own the hand that Mavi was going to have to fix. Mavi now deftly fastened a tourniquet and then laved the wound with a pungent herbal lotion. Melanie's hand began to numb, increasing her detachment from the injury. The bleeding ceased, but somehow Melanie couldn't bring herself to look into the wound. Instead, she watched with the intent expression on her mother's face as she quickly stitched the severed blood vessels and closed the long slice. She then slathered quantities of salve on the cut and bound the hand in soft cloths. Concern and doubt caused Mavi to frown, and Melanie became fearful. She suddenly remembered other things. Women losing fingers and, "My hand will be all right, won't it?" "We'll hope so." Mavi never lied, and the small, hard ball of sick fear began to unknot in Melanie's stomach. "You should have some use of it. Enough for all practical purposes." "What do you mean, practical purposes? Won't I be able to play again?" "Play?" Mavi gave her daughter a long, hard stare, as if she mentioned something forbidden. "Your playing days are over, Melanie. You're way past the teaching." "But the new harper has new songs. The ballad he sang the first night. I never heard all of it. I don't know the chordings. I want to learn." She backed off, horribly frightened by the closed look on her mother's face and the shine of pity in her eyes. "Even if your fingers will work after that slice, you won't be playing again. Content yourself that Yarnus was so indignant while old Petteron was done. Content yourself that Yarnus was so indulgent while old Petteron was dying." "But Petteron—" "That's enough buts. Here, drink this. I want you in your bed before it puts you to sleep. You've lost a lot of blood, and I can't have you fainting away on me." Stunned by her mother's words, Melanie barely tasted the bitter wine and weed. She stumbled, even with her mother's help, up the stone steps to her cubicle. She was cold despite the furs, cold in spirit, but the wine and weed had been liberally mixed, and she couldn't fight the effects. Her last conscious thought was of misery, of being cheated out of the one thing that had made her life bearable. She now knew what a dragonless rider must feel. And that, my dear friends, is the end of chapter 3. With Melanie quite possibly destroying her hand and never being able to really use it again. That fish sounds disgusting and dangerous. But when it's part of your livelihood, it's what you got to work with. So, the good news, the new harper has arrived. The bad news is, it looks like Melanie is getting all the horrible jobs in the hold to keep her busy, keep her away from music, to keep her family happy so that they don't know that that the fact that a mere girl had the audacity to learn more than just the teaching songs. I don't know, sometimes you have to wonder about people, but that is the mindset of the hold that they live in. So I'm sure you guys noticed that Miss Skitter disappeared very early in the video, but she walked away on her own. She didn't disappear far, though. She has been laying on my leg ever since. Fast asleep, but I can't move, because she has got me pinned. Love that little silly girl. Well, don't really have a whole lot to say. Did more of an intro than I'd planned. And now, well, we have that chapter done. The next one, chapter 4, I guess we're going to deal more with Melanie's hand. Hopefully things will get a little better for her, but who knows? She is, well, she's 14. At 14, the world revolves around you. And in this case, everything that is going wrong is being directed towards her. So, I guess she has the right to feel this way. I just wish there was a way to make her life a little better. Oof. Let me know what you thought in the comments below. If you enjoyed, please give me a like. I really would appreciate it. Because I really don't have a whole lot to say, and I'm being roared at. Oh, don't do that. I think I'm going to adjust the lighting a little bit. I'm not quite happy where it's sitting. It's a little bright. Maybe put it a little bit above instead, so that I'm able to read and not get into weird positions to try and read the book. But I'll see you all in 4 days with chapter 4, which I may actually record tonight since it's fairly early. But I mean, 15 minutes was a pretty good chat time. Hope you all have a great one. Thank you so much. See you at the next. Bye-bye.